picture this. It's 1973.
Yeah.
A young writer who would later become incredibly famous in her own right is standing in the blistering Florida heat. She's got a machete in her hand,
Wait, a literal machete?
literally hacking her way through waist-high, snake-infested weeds in this segregated, abandoned cemetery. And she's not looking for buried treasure, at least not the traditional kind. She's looking for an unmarked grave.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and when she finally finds the spot, she pays out of her own pocket for a headstone, and she has it engraved with the words, "A genius of the South."
I mean, it's just one of the most visceral, dramatic acts of literary reclamation in history.
Yeah.
Because that writer was Alice Walker, and the grave belonged to Zora Neale Hurston.
Exactly. And the fact that Hurston, who wrote what is unarguably a masterpiece of American literature in just 7 weeks, ended up in an unmarked, forgotten grave is, well, it's a tragedy we are going to tear into today.
It really is.
So welcome to this deep dive. Today we are exploring the brilliant, complex, and honestly highly controversial world of Zora Neale Hurston's. Their eyes were watching God.
And we've got a massive stack of sources in front of us for this one.
We really do. We're pulling from the novel itself, obviously, but we're also looking closely at the critical framework surrounding it. We have these illuminating forewords by Edwidge Danticat and Mary Helen Washington.
Plus a really dense, brilliant afterword by Henry Louis Gates Jr. and a reading group guide.
Right. So our mission today is to extract the core themes of this sweeping narrative. We are bypassing the basic plot summary we assume, Janie Crawford's general trajectory.
Yeah, we're diving straight into the mechanics of her quest for self-realization. We'll look at the incredible power and the strict limits of language. And of course, the rich tapestry of Black folk culture that Hurston captured as a trained anthropologist.
We want to figure out how Janie's journey from this voiceless, dominated girl to a woman who has been to the horizon and back can actually help you navigate your own path to authenticity.
Absolutely. Because whether you're trying to decode a classic piece of literature or looking for raw insights into relationship dynamics, this deep dive is going to serve as a real shortcut.
Or even if you're just trying to find your own authentic voice amidst the noise of other people's expectations,
Right. So to set the stage for this analysis, we have to look at the framing device Hurston uses. The story actually opens at the end.
Right. It's a flashback, basically.
Exactly. Janie is returning to Eatonville in muddy overalls, her hair swinging in a long braid. And the townspeople, the porch sitters, are just aggressively judging her.
Oh, they are ruthless.
But she is entirely unbothered. She walks right past them, sits down with her best friend Phoebe, and she's finally ready to tell her own story.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even analyze Janie's voice, we really have to look at the historical suppression of Hurston's voice. I mean, this book was basically erased from the literary canon for 30 years.
Yeah, out of print completely.
Out of print. And it wasn't just passively ignored, it was actively targeted and dismissed by the prominent Black male critics of the 1930s.
It faced a severe, almost fatal backlash. And to understand this impartially, we really have to contextualize the literary landscape when it was published in 1937.
Right, middle of the Great Depression.
Exactly. The nation is in the depths of the Depression. And the prevailing intellectual movement among Black writers was social realism.
Okay.
There was a highly politicized expectation, championed by figures like Richard Wright, that Black literature had a specific duty. It was supposed to be protest literature.
Meaning its primary function was to document the brutal realities of systemic racism and actively challenge the white establishment.
Exactly. So Wright, who was a massive literary heavyweight at the time, reviews Hurston's book in the leftist magazine New Masses. And he absolutely tears it to shreds.
It's brutal to read even now. He claimed the book carried no theme, no message, no thought.
Yeah, and the most damning thing he said was that she was exploiting quaint aspects of Negro life just to make white folks laugh. He explicitly compared her narrative technique to a minstrel show.
Which is just an incredibly heavy accusation.
And he wasn't alone in that. Elaine Locke, who was a towering figure of the Harlem Renaissance, criticized her for not writing social document fiction.
Right. He basically asked when she was going to stop writing about pseudo-primitives and face the harsh political realities of the day.
Now, our goal here isn't to take a side in a nearly century-old political debate. Wright and Locke were operating from a deeply felt conviction about what art needed to do to advance civil rights.
Right. We're just reporting what the sources show.
Exactly. But we do have to note that their expectation of political utility completely blinded them to what Hurston was actually achieving.
I mean, I get that times were incredibly hard and the stakes were so high, but isn't it wild that a beautiful piece of art was almost entirely erased just because it didn't fit the exact political utility expected of it in that specific decade?
It really is.
It's like discovering a breathtaking, priceless painting that captures the deepest complexities of the human soul and throwing it in the trash just because it doesn't function as a street map.
That's a great way to put it.
It wasn't designed to give you turn-by-turn directions to a political revolution. It was designed to show you inner life.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what Hurston was doing was revolutionary, just along a completely different axis. Mary Helen Washington's foreword points out that Hurston was shifting the narrative focus entirely.
Moving it inward.
Yes, she moved it away from external racial protest aimed at a white audience and directed it toward internal psychological liberation.
Right.
This text affirms Black cultural traditions, the language, the folklore, the humor, and revises them to center and empower a Black woman.
Which is exactly why Alice Walker had to go hacking through those weeds in 1973 to resurrect it. A whole new generation of Black women writers finally saw what the male critics of the 30s missed.
They saw a female hero who wasn't just a tragic victim of white society.
Exactly. She was someone engaged in a deeply internal struggle for her own soul.
So let's transition to how that internal struggle actually begins, because the tension of the entire novel is set up early on between two competing visions of life.
Right, starting with Janie's vision under the blossoming pear tree. Oh man, the sensory language here is just stunning. She's laying there, watching the dust-bearing bee sink into the sanctum of a bloom.
It's pure poetry.
It really is. She sees this completely natural, ecstatic, reciprocal exchange in nature. And she thinks, so this was a marriage. And that becomes her internal compass. That's her baseline for what love and autonomy should look like.
But that organic vision immediately collides with the harsh, pragmatic reality of her grandmother, Nanny.
Oh, Nanny.
Yeah. When Nanny catches Janie kissing Johnny Taylor, a neighborhood boy, she instantly forces Janie into an arranged marriage with Logan Killicks.
A man who represents land, a house, and zero romance. Like, absolutely none.
None at all. And it's so easy to read Nanny as the villain here. I mean, she literally slaps Janie for expressing desire.
She does.
But the sources, especially Edwidge Danticat's foreword, demand that we look at Nanny with profound empathy, because Nanny is entirely driven by generational trauma.
Right. Nanny was born into slavery. And she articulates her worldview in one of the most famous passages in the book.
The Mule Passage.
Yeah. She explains that the white man throws down the load, the Black man picks it up, and when he gets tired, he hands it off to the Black woman. Nanny says the nigger woman is the mule of the world.
So Nanny's ultimate dream for Janie isn't about finding a pear tree or romantic fulfillment. I mean, how could it be?
Right. It's impossible for her to even conceptualize that.
Exactly. For a woman who survived the horrors of enslavement and who saw her own daughter subjected to brutal violence, the absolute pinnacle of existence is simply protection. It's physical safety.
She wants Janie sitting on a porch, completely idle, because idleness and property are the only metrics of freedom Nanny has ever known.
And Nanny confesses that she had a deferred dream of her own. She says she wanted to preach a great sermon about colored women sitting on high, but there was no pulpit for her.
Right, she was denied that voice.
So she tries to make Janie the physical manifestation of that sermon by forcing her onto a pedestal. And Edwidge Danticat draws a really fascinating literary parallel here.
Oh, I loved this part of the foreword.
Danticat points out that in Toni Morrison's Beloved, the character Baby Suggs actually does get to preach the exact sermon Nanny was denied.
Yes. Baby Suggs takes her people to an outdoor clearing and tells them to love their flesh, but most importantly, to love your heart. Because this is the prize.
And Danticat points out the tragedy that Janie never got to hear that sermon from Nanny.
No, instead she was told to trade her heart for a 60-acre farm.
And Janie eventually realizes the immense damage this caused. She reflects later that Nanny took the biggest thing God ever made, the horizon, and pinched it into such a little bit of a thing to tie around Janie's neck to choke her.
Wow. Nanny meant to protect her, but she essentially weaponized her own trauma.
Precisely.
And to you, listening to this right now, how often do we do exactly this? How often do we inherit the survival mechanisms and the anxieties of our parents or mentors and mistake their trauma-induced boundaries for our own horizons?
That's a powerful question.
We let their very real, completely valid past fears build a fence around our present potential. We let them shrink our world.
And that shrinking of the world continues when Janie finally leaves Logan. She leaves him for Joe Stark's Jody.
Right, she thinks she's escaping to the horizon.
But she's actually just moving from one paradigm of control to a much more sophisticated one.
Jody is just a force of nature. I mean, he takes her to Eatonville, which is this all-black governed town. He buys land, opens a store, gets elected mayor, and he even buys the town's first street lamp.
He's incredibly ambitious.
But the irony is suffocating, because as he elevates her to Mrs. Mayor, he completely silences her.
Let's look at the mechanics of that silencing, because it revolves around the porch culture of Jody's store.
Okay, yeah.
In Hurston's anthropological view, the porch is the epicenter of the community. It's the main stage for oral performance. The men gather there to engage in signifying and playing of the dozens.
Okay, for anyone who might not know those specific terms, can we get an Eli 5 on that? Break that down.
Sure. So these are rich, deeply ingrained traditions of African-American verbal artistry. It involves trading rhythmic, exaggerated insults.
Like a rap battle, almost.
Sort of, yeah. It's telling tall tales and engaging in highly competitive linguistic play. It's not just talking to pass the time. It's a display of intellectual and creative power.
Got it.
They debate complex philosophical ideas through humor and metaphor. The porch is really where the community's identity is forged through language.
And Janie is desperate to participate. She loves the stories, she has her own quick wit, but Jody absolutely forbids it.
He shuts it down.
Completely. He tells her it's too common for the mayor's wife. He literally tells her that her place is in the home, not making speeches. He muzzles her intellect.
And he goes beyond intellectual muzzling. He muzzles her physical autonomy, too. Janie has this beautiful, plentiful hair that draws the attention of the men in the town.
Naturally.
But Jody's reaction to this isn't to trust his wife. He views her hair as his exclusive property. Out of this intense proprietary jealousy, he forces her to tie her hair up in a head rag whenever she is working in the store.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because this oppression doesn't last forever. The dam eventually breaks.
It has to.
Jody gets older, his body starts failing, and he becomes terrified of losing his power and his status. So he starts projecting all of his insecurities onto Janie. He's constantly insulting her age and her looks in front of the whole town just to make himself feel bigger.
Which is incredibly toxic.
Until one day, she cuts a piece of tobacco wrong in the store, and he humiliates her in front of everyone, and she finally speaks up.
And her speech is a complete linguistic dismantling of his power. It's not just a quick comeback.
No, it's lethal.
When he insults her body, she publicly strips him of his vanity. She tells him that when he pulls down his pants, he looks like the change of life.
I mean, wow, the text says Jody's vanity bled like a flood because his entire authority over Eatonville was based on this illusion of infallible, dominant maleness, and she just shattered it in front of the very men he dominated.
And Jody never recovers from that. His kidneys fail, he refuses her help, and he dies in terror. But the defining moment for Janie happens right after he takes his last breath.
Right in the bedroom.
Right. Before she even announces his death to the town, she goes to the mirror. She tears off that head rag, and she lets down her long hair.
It's such a cinematic moment.
She reclaims her physical self before she puts on the required public mask of mourning.
And after the funeral, she burns every single head rag in the house. It's an absolute fiery rejection of the pedestal, which perfectly sets the stage for the arrival of Virgil Tea Cake Woods.
Tea Cake represents a radical paradigm shift in the novel. He is younger. He has no property, no status, and absolutely no ambition to be a mayor.
And the very first meaningful interaction they have is him walking into the store and inviting her to play checkers.
Which blew her mind.
Right. For 20 years, she's been told she is too high class or her brain is too heavy to engage in play. But Tea Cake doesn't want her on a pedestal. He wants her on the ground with him.
He teaches her to fish, to shoot a gun, to drive a car. They eventually leave the safe, highly respectable town of Eatonville and move down to the Everglades, a place known as the Muck.
And the Muck is basically the antithesis of Jody's heavily manicured, controlled Eatonville.
Completely. It's wild, it's fertile, and it's chaotic. It's a place of migrant labor, Bahamian workers, juke joints, blues music, and dice games.
And Janie loves it. She loves it so much she puts on overalls and works in the bean fields, not out of financial necessity, but simply to be alongside Tea Cake.
But I want to pause here, because we really need to dig into the complexities of Tea Cake.
We do. We can't just paint him as the flawless romantic hero who saves her.
No, the sources make it very clear, and reading the book makes it clear that there are deeply problematic elements to his character and to their relationship.
This raises an important question about literary construction and Hurston's intent. As Danicat suggests in her foreword, Hurston refuses to make her characters too holy or too evil.
Right.
Because if Tea Cake were a flawless, pious savior, Janie would just be trading one deity for another. She would worship him, and the text says, all gods who receive homage are cruel. Hurston forces us to engage with human frailty.
But let's look at the specific frailties impartially, because they are genuinely jarring for a modern reader.
Yeah, let's get into it.
First, there's the theft. They get married, they go to Jacksonville, and she wakes up to find he has stolen her hidden $200.
Just took it while she was sleeping?
Right. And he uses it to throw a massive party for ugly women, just to feel like a big shot. And he doesn't invite Janie because he assumes she'd think his friends were too common.
He gambles and eventually wins it back, but it's a massive betrayal of trust right out of the gate.
It is a profound insecurity masking as bravado, and it escalates from there. The novel delves into the deeply troubling dynamics of violence and colorism on the muck.
Yeah, through the character of Mrs. Turner.
Exactly. Mrs. Turner is a black woman who is intensely colorist. She worships Caucasian features, hates dark-skinned people, and explicitly despises Tea Cake for his dark skin.
She constantly tries to convince the lighter-skinned Janie to leave him for her brother.
And how does Tea Cake react to this threat? He beats Janie. The text is unambiguous here. He slaps her around not out of direct anger at her, but to physically manifest his ownership over her to the rest of the community. He wants to show the other men that he is in control.
And the really deeply uncomfortable part is that the other men envy him for it. They praise him because Janie doesn't fight back.
It is a highly difficult passage for contemporary readers. Mary Helen Washington's foreword scrutinizes this exact dynamic, questioning the novel's seemingly uncritical depiction of this domestic violence. You have to examine why Hurston included it.
Right.
It completely ruptures the romantic idealism of the pear tree. It forces the reader to realize that Janie hasn't found a utopia.
Yeah, I have to push back a little on the idea that this is just narrative nuance. How do we reconcile Janie's supposed feminist liberation with her choosing a man who physically abuses her to soothe his own ego?
That is the exact friction Hurston wants you to sit with. Remember, Hurston was vehemently rejecting the protest literature mandate that required black authors to present only idealized, morally unimpeachable characters to white audiences.
She refused to sanitize the reality.
Exactly. She refused to sanitize the community. Janie's autonomy isn't realized by finding a perfect, flawless man. Her autonomy is realized through choice. She's no longer forced into a pristine, suffocating cage by Nanny or Jody. She actively chooses the messy, flawed, vibrant, and sometimes dangerous reality of the muck. She embraces the totality of the human experience rather than hiding from it.
That's a really challenging concept to you, the listener. Think about how often we equate autonomy with making quote-unquote perfect choices. Janie's story suggests that true agency is sometimes just having the power to choose which beautiful mess you actually want to participate in.
And that messy reality eventually brings us to the climax of the novel, the hurricane.
The hurricane. The prose here is mythological. Hurston describes the storm as a monstropolis beast.
The seminal Native Americans and the animals flee early, recognizing the signs of nature. But the workers on the muck stay. They demonstrate immense hubris. They think the dikes built by the white engineers are going to hold.
But the sea was walking the earth with a heavy heel. The dikes burst, and it's absolute chaos. During their desperate escape through the floodwaters, Janie gets blown into deep water and grabs onto a swimming cow.
Right.
But there is a massive rabid dog on the cow's back, and it attacks her. Tea Cake fights it off in the water, kills it, but he gets bitten on the cheek in the process.
They survive the storm and reach Palm Beach. But Hurston immediately plunges us right back into a stark, brutal, historical reality. Tea Cake is conscripted at gunpoint by white men to clear the dead bodies.
Yeah, and Hurston details the horrific segregation of the dead here. The guards force the workers to examine the hair of the bloated, unrecognizable corpses.
It's a grueling scene.
If the hair is straight, they get a pine box. If the hair is textured, they're thrown into a ditch with quicklime. It is a chilling detail, the enforcement of Jim Crow, even in death, even in the middle of an apocalypse.
We are just reporting what Hurston documented here, but it is a devastating critique embedded right in the middle of this personal love story.
Tea Cake escapes that horrific work eventually, but the tragedy is already sealed. The dog was mad. Tea Cake develops rabies.
And the disease attacks his brain, completely replacing his love with this paranoid, violent jealousy, he pulls a pistol on Janie.
He pulls the trigger twice on empty chambers that Janie had secretly rotated beforehand. And as he goes to fire the live round, Janie is forced to shoot him with a rifle to save her own life.
She has to kill the only man who ever treated her as an equal.
It's utterly heartbreaking. And this leads us to her trial for murder. The courtroom is full of curious white women and all of Tea Cake's black friends from the muck who have turned against Janie because they don't understand the sickness.
This is where the literary heavyweights in our sources really start debating the text.
Yeah, the trial scene is a huge point of contention.
The debate revolves around Janie's voice during the trial, because after an entire novel about Janie finding her voice, the critic Robert Steptoe famously pointed out a major structural anomaly.
Okay, what is it?
During her testimony, Janie is curiously silent. The narrative actually switches to the third person. We don't get Janie's exact quoted dialogue defending her life. The narrator merely summarizes that she made them see how it was.
Oh, I see.
So Steptoe argued this undermines her whole journey. He felt she loses her voice when she needs it most.
But Alice Walker vehemently disagreed with that. She defended this at an academic panel in 1979.
What was Walker's argument?
Well, what's fascinating here is Walker's feminist reframing of silence. Walker argued that women do not have an obligation to speak just because men, in this case, an all-white male jury, or the angry black men in the gallery expect them to perform.
Interesting.
Yeah. Intentional silence is a profound exercise of power. Janie doesn't owe her most intimate, agonizing truth to that room. She gives them the functional facts to save her life, but she reserves her true emotional voice for her friend Phoebe on the porch.
That makes a lot of sense. And Henry Louis Gates Jr. takes this analysis even deeper in his afterword. He argues it's not just about silence. It's about a specific literary technique Hurston masters here called free indirect discourse.
Okay, I need an ELI 5 for this. Explain like I'm 5. Because free indirect discourse sounds like dense academic jargon. How does that actually work on the page?
Think of it as a blending of two minds into one sentence. Normally in a book, you have a narrator who speaks in formal, proper English, right?
Yeah.
And then you have characters who speak in dialect inside quotation marks. There's a wall between them.
Right, a clear separation.
But free indirect discourse tears that wall down. The narrator begins a sentence in standard literary English, but smoothly slides right into the character's exact thoughts, using the character's unique dialect and rhythm without ever using he said or she thought.
Oh, wow.
The outside voice and the inside voice become completely indistinguishable.
So what does this all mean for Janie as a character?
Well, Gates argues this technique is Hurston's answer to W.E.B. Du Bois' famous concept of double consciousness. Du Bois wrote that Black Americans constantly feel their two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two unreconciled strivings.
Right.
They are forced to see themselves through the eyes of a dominant, often hostile white culture while maintaining their own internal Black identity.
So by blending the formal, literate narrator voice with Janie's Southern Black vernacular voice, Hurston is literally healing that psychological split on the page.
Exactly.
She is showing that Janie has integrated her two selves. She doesn't have to choose between being articulate and being culturally authentic. She's both.
Spot on. Janie is acquitted, but the muck is empty for her without Tea Cake. She packs up, takes a packet of his seeds to plant, and returns to Edenville. Which brings us full circle to the beginning of the book.
She's back on the porch with Phoebe, and she delivers the core thesis of her entire life. She says she is satisfied to be home because she has been to the horizon and back. She tells Phoebe they got to go to God and they got to find out about living for themselves.
She is declaring the absolute supremacy of experiential knowledge. She warns Phoebe that talking don't amount to a hill of beans when you can't do nothing else.
You cannot map out a life through the stories of others. You have to experience the hurricane, the heartbreak, the pear tree, and the muck for yourself.
And it works. Phoebe says she feels 10 feet taller just listening, and she's not going to be satisfied just sitting around her house anymore.
As we conclude this deep dive, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, drawing on that concept of double consciousness from Gates.
Gates notes that Hurston viewed language not merely as an adornment, but as a profound, vital mechanism to name emotions.
For her whole life, Janie had to manage her double consciousness. She had the rigid, functional, quiet voice that Jody demanded of her at the store, and she had her deeply expressive, authentic porch voice that she finally unleashed.
So look at your own life this week. Consider your own version of double consciousness. Are you speaking almost exclusively in a rigid, purely functional narrator voice at work? or even in your relationships.
Are you actively suppressing your deeply personal, idiosyncratic porch voice because you fear it's too messy, too emotional, or too common for the people around you?
What would happen if, like Hurston, you found a way to blend them? What if you took down the wall between your professional, acceptable self and your raw, authentic self?
Because if you can seamlessly integrate those voices into your own version of free, indirect discourse, you don't just survive your story, you become the author of it.
You step off the predetermined map and you learn to navigate the ocean.
What a phenomenal place to leave it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Their Eyes Were Watching God. Go read it, go study it, and go find out about living for yourselves. See you next time.